So thanks everyone for coming to attend that session about the water security. And the key objective really for that session is we are going to share with you the water security guide that being released by GCF recently that actually lay out the strategy where GCF is looking to invest in the water security and also what type of financial instrument that can actually be implemented in the water sector to also looking for how we can also mobilize the water sector. So plus we'll also talk about like some new initiatives or new focus area that we try to test them with you to see like where these are two ideas are really fit. One is really how we treat water as a new asset class. The second one really about integrated green infrastructure for climate resilience. So we really need to test also those two ideas. And today we are have a distinguished panelist here with us and also three presentations. So I will introduce the speaker and the panelist before we start so we can kick with less time. So the first speaker will be myself. So my name is Amgad Elmahdi. So I am the water sector senior specialist at the Green Climate Fund. And then we have the second speaker will be Ms. Ayaka Fujera. She's the climate investor specialist. She's the first on my left. And then the second on my left will be the third speaker, Dr. Sylvia Guy. She's the regional advisor for WASH program, climate and sustainable environment at UNICEF for East Asia and Pacific region. And then we have Andrea Shishiran. He is innovation technology and co-funding managers at GSF for private sector facilities. And then we have two distinguished panelists with us. The fourth on my left here is Dr. and Senator Chantal Monoro-Knight. She's the minister in the Prime Minister office at Barbados. And the last on our panelist here, our distinguished Excellence Minister, Dr. Nisreen Tamimi, for Environment Quality Authority in Palestine. So with that intro, we'll kickstart so we don't lose time as we really have great things to share with you and get your feedback. So I will start by take you through the water security guide and how that really represents the role for GCF in water finance. Plus also talk about the new initiative that we try to promote here, which is really the new asset class, how we can actually treat water as a new asset class, really to promote the private sector for water reuse, sanitation, and probably also desalination. So as we know, like we are facing increasing demand, and that increasing demand by itself in the water sector is actually open the opportunity for investment. So we understand from business system, if there is a demand, so there is always a market. But of course, there is also a barriers for that, and we'll reflect on that. But really, what we really need to look about water security, it's a really a systematic solution, systematic approach that really look at the climate and food and energy security to be able really to make an impact. So what we are facing in our global world here, like no one can really avoid the climate change. So we have unavoidable impact, and we have a very clear signal in terms of increasing temperature and how that reflecting in terms of the drought, in terms of the flood, as intensity and frequency as well. And what we have seen over than 80% from really the climate impact are manifested in the water. So the water sector become really the connector where you see as a medium where you see impact, but also as a medium where you can start the solutions, especially as well for adaptation. But if we look from the global, from the financial lens as well, what is really the impact on the water sector from the financial lens. So we can see in terms of values of dollar, in terms of the losses from access to water, but also for sanitation service, and how that really impact the number of people and even the fund. So for example, we see the fund required for infrastructure gap that can actually go up to like 6 trillion by 2040. But we understand as well the demand and also the increase of the scarcity that will face very much most of the nations, like the development countries, that are up to like 40% in a shortfall or in a supply on average. And without doubt, like the NDCs, like 70% have already set the water sector as a high priority to be able to look at as a high priority sector as well. But where we are in terms of like SDGs and the Paris Agreement, and how far we still need to go. So we only have like 8 years really to go. And if we look at the tracker for like how we do on SDGs, so are very again behind even for the water SDG 6 as well. But if we look at the financial, like how much financial really are required for that, so we can see trillions of money is still required really to feed the water sector, just to make water available for drinking, but also for water infrastructure that really go up to like trillions, like 50 and 60 trillions. But what would be really the key barriers here? So if there's the financial gap, what are really the key barriers? And of course, as we know, the water sector, it's very dominated by the public finance. And that's reflecting actually in the number of barriers in terms of like the underpricing value of the water, but also most of the water projects are very specific projects. So always at like a small scale and a very specific project that actually increase their transaction cost. And also because we don't have the right value to the water, so it's hard really to look at how we monetize the benefits for the water sector. So what is the landscape telling us in terms of really the donors, but also in terms of like the key aspect where each donor are really focused? And I just list them here, but I highlighted the GCF, as you see in the red bar here. And it's also in the on the very far left on your side on the screen, you will see again, I highlighted like the areas in terms of like wastewater, desalination, water governance, water management. So all different aspects in water, ecosystem-based approach for mitigation and adaptation. So those really the area where GCF is focused. But really sometimes we hear that financial gap, and the key questions here, is it really the quantity of the financial gap or even also the quality? And I think in terms of the quality also come with the level of accessibility, like how that finance be accessible by countries in needs as well. And if we look at GCF, we really very unique in terms of the level of constitutionality and also the type of instruments or the financial instruments that we are providing. So we are providing really grants, which everyone is aware of, but we also do loans that very concessional loan to the public and private sector. We also do guarantees and equities. And we try to use those different instruments to help really to make the blended finance and structure the blended finance that really can mobilize the private sector and looking at the public-private partnership or special vehicle purpose, how we can really use those different financial instruments to make that happen, to make that able to be structured at the country using the country context as well. So taking all this, our understanding in terms of the challenge, in terms of the financial requirements and also the gaps and the barriers in the sector. So we have launched the water security guide last month that really lay out the strategy for us at GCF to really invest in the water sector. And what we are looking here is really if we put it in a theory of change, so how we can really create that enabling investment environment to be able to fund the transformational water project. And we really need to look at those transformational water projects. That will really help our countries, the recipients, to be able to using the pathway for a change to serve really the water conservation and preservation. And that will really make again a positive impact on the water sector by itself and provide that systemic solutions. And to transfer that theory of change in a simple way, so we provide two paradigm shifts, two pathways for paradigm shifts. One is really the water conservation, that really looking at water reuse, decentralized system, and so on. And the other one really to strengthen the integrated water resource management that again go for like water governance, ecosystem-based approach, and different elements. So let's see those two pathways in a little bit more detail. So the first one really is to look at the enhanced water conservation and efficiency and also water reuse. And that really focus on mitigation solutions. So how we really reduce the CO2 as a Paris Agreement objective. And the second one to look at like strengthening the integrated water resource management, and that really to protect the water related disaster and also make that preservation for the water resources. And of course, looking at the resilience in the water supply and also the sanitation. And that really focus on adaptation solutions. So if we look at the first pathways, what could be the different type of projects or components that you can actually bring in under that pathway? So you could look at really decentralized water management, where you look at how you look at the decentralized wastewater reuse, smart water management, how you look at the real-time monitoring, where you reduce again the CO2 emission and detect where the leakage, where the losses, so that actually reflect on the energy that's being used for abstraction. But also you look for the resource recovery as well, like the opportunity of generating the biogas from the water sector. And we also keep hearing about green hydrogen again as another opportunity, but you really need to consider again in the green hydrogen, what is really the impact on the water sector as well. If we look at the second pathway, that really looking at the integrated water resource management. So that really focus on ecosystem-based approach for mitigation and adaptation really, or very much adaptation for flood and drought. But you also look at alternative water use. So how you can look at alternative water use for non-potable use as well. And then all the different elements of integrated water resource management, that including planning and policies and so on. So we understand that guide provide this high level strategic thinking, but it doesn't really help our NDCs or our accredited entities, our NTA, to really transform that into developing a project. So with work with colleagues in Netherlands, we try to bring that water sector guide into a water project guidelines that actually take you in a step approach, how you can actually take that to develop a project in a stepwise. So if you follow those steps, you should be able really to come with, like a nice project or a nice project plan. I would try to do this like for 4 example project, like integrated water resource management. As we see, it's again, it's a high priority for most of the countries, but we also do this for climate resilience WASH projects. We do this for drought management project. As we can see, it's again, one of the key aspects of climate change impact in many countries with agriculture drought, but we also do that for flood management. As we can see also the impact, like recently last months in Pakistan, for example, and the number of losses that happened. So with that, like if you develop a project, so you really need to consider again the key investment criteria that GCF really assists the project against. And those really the impact potential in terms of like reduction in the CO2, the number of beneficiaries, but also the paradigm shift in terms of the solution or the innovative or the scalability of the solutions, and then sustainable development, how those solutions are really sustainable, the recipient needs in terms of the countries or the community, but also the promote the country ownership and then the efficiency and effectiveness in terms of the best lesson and economics. So how we translate that into the water aspect or water sector. So if you look at the impact potential, so that's really coming to where is really the most water scarcity region. And that could be, again, the area you focus on, and that could be at the country level or within the country or at a regional scale. And then you look at what will be the intervention that actually can make the people living on those regions become more resilient, or using a technology that become, again, reducing the CO2 emission. And then you look at the paradigm shift, and that in terms, again, of not just the grant. So how we can really mobilize the private sector. And we will have the second speaker really show us a project that's being funded by GCF that actually try to make that happen, bring the private sector into the water sector. And then the third criteria is the sustainable development. So how the project really serving the SDGs, and also looking at the different climate action that being defined already under SDG 6, which actions you are trying to tackle here. And then the recipients need in terms of really the capacity of the recipients, how we improve and build the capacity. So again, for GCF projects in the water sector, we would like to see a capacity building component in those projects as well. And then the country as well, the country ownership. So how, again, to ensure sustainability, to bring the country to own the project and own the outcome of that project. And then the efficiency and effectiveness, it's really how we design that project, or the project being designed on the best practice solutions, and also the lesson learned that's available. And we try to make the drive, the change through those 4 pillars for us, which is really transformational planning. So how we bring the water sector as a priority in the climate change plan, how we catalyze the innovation and that come to the solution, the technology, how we catalyze that innovation, how we mobilize finance, and that in terms of the private sector, how we bring the private sector to invest in the water sector as a public dominated sector, and then the population and knowledge, like how we ensure the knowledge that actually created are available and also can be taken for forward projects. So if I translate those 4 elements in an example here for like WASH project, what are they? And again, that really including here, like how we ensure the WASH project are really sustainable and put the WASH or promote WASH as a key priority again in the climate action plan at the country level. And that's really a key point for transformational planning. And then how we can set again a policy that put it as a high priority for interventions to make that. If we look at that, catalyzing the innovations, and that's really looking at the different water project in WASH to be really designed to look at the water supply with full cycle. So how we can bring that full cycle in the planning, and looking at efficiency as well. How we can engage with the multi-development banks as well and the private sector to invest in a multi-purpose project. Because if you look at the WASH, and we will hear from Sylvia as a third speaker here that talk about WASH program and what is need to be done. And then the third element, which is mobilizing finance in related to WASH, how you think about blended finance, public-private partnership in that WASH service and social service, how you bring that in that structure of the project. And then the last one really to look at how we optimize adaptation and mitigations outcomes and facilitate that public partnership as well, public-private partnership, and how we maintain all the learning that being developed as well in the WASH planning projects. So taking what we have understand so far, so we start to think as well, all right, how we can really help the countries, how we can really help the NDE and accredited entities. And we try to promote those two new initiatives or focus area for us in the water sector. As you can see, the first one really looking at the integrated gray-green infrastructure. And what we are thinking here is really how we really establish a well-managed really mix of the gray and green infrastructure in a way to be able really to serve, but also to mitigate as well, like the energy-intensive gray infrastructure, but also increase that level of carbon storage. And that will really promote through also designing the type of finance. And GCF in supporting in that can really help the countries to look at the policy, the legislation that is actually required to make that happen, but also how we help the country to take that into the market. And that's through, again, the structure and the innovative financial structure, where we'll hear about it as well from my colleague Andrea here. But also to look at how we assess that, what type of tools can really assess that. So we can also help the countries with those tools and help them to make that in a pilot approach, like for adaptation project as well. And also help them in the way they can design really the blended finance, where can take such type of projects again to the private sector. The second focus area here for us is really the water asset transition. We've been hearing for several years about water assets and how we can manage the water assets, how we can operate that water asset, how we ensure it's maintained to the long term, how we ensure it's sustainable, how we bring the private sector to invest in the water assets, which mainly are public invested assets as well, and owned by the public as well. So what we try to promote here, again, that idea of innovative approach to think about the water asset as a new asset class that really can be developed or designed or redesigned or refurbished through really accredited enhancement and develop that debt capital market. So we can actually take that asset to the market, but to also develop that acceptable financial return or acceptable revenue stream that very much in line with the ESG, like environment and social and gender impacts, but also with Paris Agreement. So it's actually served the Paris Agreement in terms of adaptation and mitigation, and then also provide that, again, at the link with SDGs. And the way we can do this to happen or support the country to make it happen and the accredited entity that, again, through helping the countries really to develop that different policy and strategy to allow that environment or to build that environment to make that new asset class established, and then finance that transition. So come here to de-risk that investment, to support that transition for that assets, and then help again in the way that financial model for those assets can be designed. So let's focus on that just one approach, which I would like to make it like the main focus for the discussion here, which is really that innovative approach for the asset class that will really help, again, the municipalities and also helping that asset for like water reuse or sanitation to be really scaled and meeting the demand, and also providing the water for different purpose. And it can be really scaled up and again, mobilize the private sector. And of course, serve the number of SDGs like SDG 3 and 6 and 7, 13, 14, and also 17 for public-private partnership. So what is that type of new asset means here in terms of like, if we need to think about it? So we put it again in that structure of theory of change. So how we make that change happen. So what we believe in is if we really said that finance that can be deployed, which is a concessional finance or credit enhancement finance, to really reduce the risk and the barrier that have been identified of the water security interventions. That will really make or catalyze really the private sector to really, and also the commercial finance at the scale to really invest on those water interventions. And one of those water interventions will be really looking at the asset from that angle, or defining the water assets as a new asset class. That will really ensure again that financial viability of the new asset. So it will make the project bankable and also affordable as well by using that level of credit enhancement. So by creating that new asset class approach, we see that will really de-risk the water security investment, so encourage more investment in the water security. It will help to scale up the blended finance, and of course, increase the collaboration with the financial partners here that could be, again, at local or regional scale, or even international financial institutions as well. So if we put that new asset class in one slide, what are the key elements here we need to look at? So 4 key elements here: financial, acceptable revenue stream, Paris Agreement in line with the Paris Agreement, and SDGs. So for SDGs, it's a very straightforward how we really link that asset to a number of SDGs that can really serve that. And for Paris Agreement, so how that asset can contribute in terms of reducing CO2 or improving the resilience in terms of number of beneficiaries. In terms of the financial elements, so what type of financial elements here? How we crowd in, how we use credit enhancement, how we build in the public-private partnership, how we use the special vehicle purpose here to define that as to establish that asset, to develop that asset as well. And in terms of the revenue stream, those could be, again, there is a number of revenue stream here can be used. So water tariff, it's working for the purpose of use. We understand it's not working in every country, but again, based on the purpose of use, you can look at how you can actually build that as well. The opportunity of the byproduct in terms of like fertilizers or nutrients that actually can create that revenue streams as well. The feed-in tariff, if you bring in the energy aspect, the solar aspect, so that can again become again as a new revenue streams. And then a new revenue stream that we start to happen, which is also the carbon market as well, or the carbon credits. So how that asset again contribute to the carbon credit as well, which can also generate another revenue stream. So with that, I would like to really conclude with a number of key messages here. So the water sector guide, it's been launched, it's available on our website, you can access, and in the panel outside, you can also see the code, and you can get it on your phone. It really gives that type of level of strategic thinking about the water security in this as a sector, and also what type of financial instrument that can actually be used. And it also presents those 2 initiatives as well in more depth, but also the 2 pathways for paradigm shift. If we look at the pathways, so what GCF can really offer to make like the idea of the new asset class really to move forward, and how we can support it, and that again through really providing support for the countries to make that level of policy and institution framework that's required to develop that enabling investment environment to be able to mobilize the private sector and de-risk that finance and the transformation or the transition phase. So we minimize the risk as well for the private sector. And finally, we support that again, new financial model that really come with an acceptable revenue streams that's in line with the ESG and SDGs, and also the Paris Agreement. With that, thank you for your listening. And then we'll hear back from my second speaker here today, that actually take us from that again strategic thinking and discussion to one practical solution in the private sector where GCF come and support that. So with that, I would like to invite Ayaka. And we did the second presentation also.
Thank you very much, Amgad. 100% agree with you that bankability and affordability is very important to crowding private sector finance. So from my side, my name is Ayaka Fujiwara, Climate Investment Specialist of the Private Sector Facility of the GCF. And here I will be introducing a very practical example called Climate Investor 2. And before I start the presentation, I have prepared a video for you. So I hope we can now play the video. The imbalance between the water cycle and climate change is actually reducing the freshwater availability with people, affecting many livelihoods across the developing countries. Climate Investor 2 program is essentially a fund that will create water, sanitation, and ocean infrastructure in developing countries where the water problems is part of everyday life. After the implementation of this program, 11 million people in developing countries can have access to clean water. We are also excited about the participation of GCF because we are hoping that this will create the momentum of private sector's participation in water projects, which are currently heavily invested only by public sector financiers. Thank you so much. Now, if we can go back to the presentation, that would be much appreciated. Thank you. Thank you so much. So I hope the video provided some idea on this innovative private sector water program. We're very much proud of this program because it focused heavily on this water sector, which usually struggles to crowd in private sector financing. And so the objective of this presentation from my side is to learn the strategic significance of this project, as well as the financial structure that we used in order to make this happen, along with the private sector financiers. Of course, this is not the only workable solution in terms of the financial structure, but I think it's a good learning case study. So as you already know, if you look at the climate finance chart on the right-hand side, you will see that the funding gap on adaptation is potentially hundreds of billions of US dollars. And as the effect of climate change are already being felt today, there's an urgent financing need for infrastructure, which will help countries and the vulnerable people adapt to the changing climate. So essentially, Climate Investor 2 is GCF's first at-scale private sector program in adaptation and in water sector. It is a cross-cutting fund that supported the private sector to develop and construct climate-resilient infrastructure projects in developing countries in the water, sanitation, and ocean sectors. There are many countries that are undergoing water stress, and Climate Investor 2 will help adapt to climate change by building infrastructure which sources, transports, and treats the water necessary for both municipal and industrial users. So this was particularly meaningful for the GCF because, as I said, usually water sector is financed by public sector, and it struggles to crowd in private sector capital. The sector, however, is arguably the most important target sector for climate adaptation intervention, not just because of the severe funding gap, but also because 780 million people still do not have access to improved water resource. And in Asia and Africa, the demand shortage is still pronounced. unsafe drinking water and poor sanitation is still a huge problem in those regions, and the program has been designed to address these constraints. So Climate Investor 2 has in total of 3 funds. The development funds from the left, development fund, the construction equity fund, and the refinancing fund. And out of these 3 funds, GCF has participated in the first 2 funds from the left. Firstly, GCF reimbursable grant capital of 45 million went to the development fund, where we will invest in early stage ideas to demonstrate the feasibility of commercial infrastructure project. The remaining 100 million from GCF is going to go to the construction equity fund, where they will invest in something that has shown some track record in development fund to further develop the idea into a construction stage. Climate Investor 2 then has the refinancing fund, which is a third phase of the fund, where a portion of the equity would be refinanced with a debt post-construction with the private sector. So through this process, they will then exit from the fund, but the portion of the portion of the exit capital will be reinvested to the construction equity fund to finance ideas that have shown some track record, again, from the development fund. So essentially, through the life of the fund, they will repeat this process for 2-3 times. So that is the basic business model of this. Climate Investor 2 had a blended finance structure where they crowd in different investors at different level. So as you can see, we are participating in the first 2 phases of this fund where the risk is higher. Development fund, for example, is a total of 100 million. They will invest in smaller projects, but essentially a lot of the projects that they invest at this stage is early stage. So where commercial investors, private sector investors may not be necessarily comfortable coming in. And here we are coming in at early stage to resolve that gap. We also finance the construction equity fund, which takes the 3-tier approach. So we have the tier 1, which is the concessional capital, which is 200 million, out of which 100 million is from us. We have tier 2, that is 400 million, and tier 3, which is 400 million. Tier 2 and tier 3 come both from commercial sector financiers, and us being at the bottom of the tier, at tier 1, helps give comfort to the tier 2 and tier 3 commercial investors. This kind of a tiered approach was ideal for GCF in de-risking other commercial investors, and the blended finance approach is becoming increasingly important, especially in private sector adaptation projects like this. Essentially, this structure enables us to crowd in private sector investors who are otherwise very hesitant, interested but hesitant to participate in this kind of initiative. Oftentimes we feel that private sector investors tend to shy away from adaptation projects just because there isn't enough track record in the market. In private sector where the return on investment is critical, it is difficult for private sector investors to participate in something that has not many track record. So here our participation will not guarantee a return, but still having us as a cushion to their investment or their return provides some level of comfort. And without this kind of blended finance structure, I don't think it would have been possible. So this happened with the help of accredited entity of FMO, but of course with the executing entity of CFM, and it required a heavy engagement with the local partners, of course. And we knew from our experience in Climate Investor 1 that the executing entity of this program, climate fund managers, are very much present locally, which helped that, which helped us, build the case. Now, I'd like to talk about the investment criteria of the GCF, which was also mentioned in Amgat's presentation. In order to bring a project to the GCF, it's ideal that at least some of them scores highly. And I'm going to introduce some of the investment criteria that has scored high in this project to give you an idea. In this case, the impact potential was high. Climate Investor 2 is expected to avoid up to about 45 million tons of CO2 and reforest watershed, restore wetland. It would provide water storage, invest in desalination, as well as implement wastewater management and treatment systems to ultimately directly benefit 10.5 million individuals in developing countries. It will also aim to improve water resilience and services by increasing access to water and sanitation, where in countries where demand of supply to preserve water resources and protect the environment is high. Paradigm shift. The second criteria from the top was also high because access to because water and ocean management areas are typically publicly financed, and we thought that by having this kind of tiered approach with blended finance structure, it would open up a new market for private sector to participate in this kind of water and ocean fund. Sustainable development score was also high because access to water and sanitation is an enabling factor for economic development, poverty reduction, and the facilitation and promotion of more gender-inclusive societies. Moving on to the next slide. Here's a slide on climate impact measures and expected impacts. So in the area of adaptation, we will have 11 million people supplied with safe drinking water, 4 million people provided with sanitation. And in the area of mitigation, 3.5 million tons of CO2 emission will be avoided per year. This result area is where we worked on the most, perhaps in private sector especially. Adaptation result area is quite key because even though a lot of private sector investors are interested in adaptation projects, oftentimes we don't really know how exactly to count those result areas. And I think this project was an excellent example where we were able to showcase these result areas. I hope that the overview of the structure of Climate Investor 2 that we covered today will help you identify potential projects that you would like to explore with GCF. And here are my contact details in case you have any projects you'd like to discuss. What we have covered today was very good, but at the same time, this is not the only workable financial structure. So we'd like to discuss and tailor financial solutions that are workable for your particular project. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ayaka. So before we start the third presentation, we just wanted to play another video. So if the control room can help us with that. And that really will show us a case by UNICEF, where show really how WASH should be really at the top of the climate agenda and reflect really very much the need for the climate resilience WASH. Can we play the second video, please?
Climate change poses one of the greatest threats to our future, and it is inextricably linked to water. Water scarcity, droughts, cyclones, and other natural disasters threaten our water supply and have a direct impact on children's lives. Although the water and sanitation sector has not benefited from large-scale climate funds to date, the sector offers enormous opportunities to contribute to both climate change mitigation and adaptation efforts. Climate-resilient WASH services are more sustainable, strengthen community resilience to climate change and natural disasters, generate employment and livelihood opportunities, and reduce the risks of conflict and migration. The WASH sector can help lower carbon emissions through the use of renewable energy and more efficient systems. In Ukraine, hydraulic modeling of the water network improves water and energy efficiency by identifying sections with leaks. Replacing them not only saves water, but also reduces the cost of operating the systems and lowers greenhouse gas emissions. The wash sector can contribute to mitigation by reducing emissions through the use of solar-powered wastewater treatment. In Jordan, an innovative approach uses solar power to treat wastewater from mosques and schools, which is then reused for irrigation. This saves scarce water resources and provides excess solar power for income-generating activities. The opportunities presented by WASH to ensure the resilience of communities are enormous and continue to increase. In Mozambique, replacing shallow hand pumps with solar-powered systems allowed communities to access water even during droughts. When Cyclone Idai struck, it destroyed homes, schools, and clinics, leaving hundreds of thousands of people homeless. But the water systems continue to operate, providing life-saving water to communities without the need for costly emergency water supplies. In areas most hit by water scarcity in Madagascar, water systems were constructed to provide water for domestic use as well as small-scale irrigation systems. This has allowed families to grow crops and to have convenient access to water without having to walk long distances. This has the added benefit of providing nutritious food for children and generating income for very vulnerable households. In Bangladesh, surface water and rainwater collected from rooftops is collected and filtered and then injected into the saline aquifer. This creates a freshwater bubble, providing fresh water and protecting the aquifer from pollution and storm surges. The water is then collected by the community through a hand pump during the dry season or extreme climatic events. In the face of the rapidly intensifying climate crisis, we must collectively work together to ensure everyone has access to a climate-resilient water and sanitation service. By doing so, the WASH sector increases the resilience of vulnerable communities while simultaneously reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It also accelerates social and economic development, creating sustainable livelihood opportunities and critical skills for young people, making this world a better place for present and future generations.
Can we get the third presentation on the screen? And with that, I would like to invite Dr. Sylvia Kaya, the Regional Advisor for UNICEF.
So I hope that you felt a little bit inspired by some of the examples that this video was trying to bring to you. We want to generate a little bit of attention about the fact that in this discussion on water security, we need to really look at the needs of people, at the most vulnerable communities that are indeed the ones that are suffering the most the effects of climate change, because we see how the shocks are affecting them in a very, let's say, striking way, because they are the ones that have lower service levels or no service at all, right? Because we are still facing this situation. And the climate change impacts harder on these people that are more vulnerable, because as we see, there is increased time to fetch water. There is, poorer people that are living in flooded areas that needs to move when needs to kind of go to a different place, or they are homeless when they are their houses are flooded. We see that how people with disabilities are really more vulnerable. So for all these, UNICEF is really taking a lot of interest in linking everything that has to do with development and the climate agenda, linking it through the social sectors, or what we call the social infrastructure, in order to really address this issue and generate a little bit more of the attention in that area. Now, to do that, some years back, we partnered with Global Water Partnership, and we produced a framework that is for climate resilient WASH services. And you see it here on the screen. I am going to go a little bit quickly, mindful of time, but it basically provides a framework on how to operate in the WASH sector. This framework is being implemented now in more than 90 countries worldwide. And it's very simple, as you see, right? It's about 4 main steps that I am going to go one by one very quickly. The first one is trying to really understand the problem and understand the risks, do a thorough risk analysis and understand how climate change impact the wash services, but also the communities where people and of course children live, right? And we do this analysis looking at the hazards, at the exposure, at the vulnerabilities, but also at the capacities in order to understand what are the major risks that you are facing. Then we go and try to identify which are the best options that respond to those risks. And you know, we try to shortlist them because there could be potentially a lot of options. We try to shortlist them and we propose some criteria to shortlist the options. But definitely the options need to respond to three main objectives. One is that the services that the wash service provides is climate resilience, right? It's able to cope with the shocks and with the events. We also want another objective, which is that these wash services, through being climate resilience, provide and increase community resilience. And this is the link with the livelihoods and other options that you have seen in some of the examples of the video. And also we have a greener sector, and we want to assure that we have, you know, the options that are chosen are somehow lowering the carbon footprint of our sector. So in order to appraise these options, as I said, there are a series of criteria. You see them on the screen. You see them better than me, that I see it very in a very small letter in the screen. But using all these criteria, we are trying to shortlist what are these best options. It's about efficiency, it's about cost, it's about capacity, it's about different criteria that will help the sector to identify which are these best options that responds better to the risks that have been prioritized. And this is a very important already part of your climate rationale. And we have been discussing this morning about a lot of the frustrations around the climate rationale and how to go about it, but definitely doing this systematic approach can help really the sector to understand and set up the basis for producing a strong and sound climate rationale. There is another part, which is delivering solutions. Obviously, the delivering solutions will need financing, and here is where we are, you know, legitimately claim that the wash sector is not really receiving enough funds from the, you know, green climate architecture that is here, starting by the GCF, of course, and how we are going to be able to leverage this finance by getting in the previous step, getting the things right. And this is one of the points that for us is critical, because we are in this scenario now where the public finance is shrinking, right, due to the crisis and the COVID crisis and everything else. And we also see that ODA is also shrinking because of the conflict and the need to respond to the conflict, and also the, you know, the COVID, the post-COVID kind of situation in which we are in. So we really need to be creative on how we are going to go about this. So we really need to demonstrate and position the value of the wash sector into the climate financing space. As part of delivering solutions and accessing these different climate funding, we have also produced some guides as a part of the framework that explain a little bit the sector, how this financing is accessible. And of course, the last of the steps is looking at the monitoring part. How are we going to elaborate or choose a set of indicators that will help you in the sector to really measure where are you going, how much effort is putting in place, how much this is impacting in the communities, in their resilience and their adaptive capacity, and in the sustainability of the sector, of the services, sorry, in the long term. I'm going a little quickly because you have this in the website, and you can really access to all these guidance and materials and tools that are here. We are about to launch an update of this framework, and I think that the plan is to launch it at COP this year. So you will be able to, I mean, it's already accessible, but you will be able to see before the end of the year the new guidance and the new update that we are finalizing now. In terms of focusing a little bit the discussion on the water security, and I am going to be also very quick here because being mindful of time, it's important that we place in these 4 areas of the water security as per definition or proposed definition by the UN Water, right? And it's the same that GCF is using indeed. And of course, we are looking at water from different dimensions, and we don't want to forget the dimension of drinking water and sanitation services for people, because this is the area where it becomes this social service. And it's important to don't forget that, because we are talking about the people and what people need. And I think that this already has been presented by Amgat in terms of how much we are still lagging behind in terms of achieving the SDGs target 6.1 and 6.2. And I think that from the perspective of this social kind of climate resilient wash sector and social infrastructure, we can really definitely link. And by promoting this climate resilience, we can address both the SDG targets as well as the global targets on mitigation, and particularly on adaptation. And the IPCC also has been really mindful on that. In the fifth report and in the sixth report, there are clear references on how this connects, how the connection between development and resilience and adaptation. And definitely they use this same risk approach that we have been exploring in the last few years and implementing in a lot of countries. My last point here is in the need to connect and to look at what is the interface between the people that live in highly vulnerable areas to climate change, right? Highly, affected areas. And there is, if you look at the blue part of the picture, there is people that lives in highly affected areas that already have a service. Even this service could be safely managed, but not necessarily this service is climate resilient. So we need to look at retrofitting these services to assure that they are climate resilient. So climate finance should definitely help us to work in this space. There is another space, which is the space where overlaps the gray zone, the people that are living in highly risk areas, but don't have access to start with. And these people also that have never had access before, we also need to access to the climate finance in order to provide services for the first time that are climate resilient and address the needs of the population in a way that will be resilient for the future shocks. So to conclude, basically, I think that, and based on what Amgat presented on the two pathways, I think that investing in climate resilient water and sanitation services is really aligned with the GCF paradigm shifting pathways for water security. In terms of mitigation, of course, the existing services or the yet to be built services represent an opportunity for reducing the emissions. And we have seen some examples in the video. And for the pathway on most focus on adaptation, and as the IPCC report is telling us, climate resilient water and sanitation services increase community resilience, and these basic social services reduce vulnerability, particularly in those areas that are highly exposed and that have lack of access. Rural population are overwhelmingly lagging behind of services. And in those services, maybe the financial viability is not optimal, right? From a financial perspective, but still it's in the long term, it will help to really reduce the vulnerability and increase the adaptation. Let me finalize by saying that obviously there is no water security without access, right? We cannot talk about water security if we don't have access to start with. And we cannot talk about community resilience and adaptation and increasing the adaptation and working towards the adaptation agenda without addressing the needs of the people that are most vulnerable, that at this present moment in time don't have yet resources, access to services, and are the ones that are left behind. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. So thanks, Sylvia, for that presentation. So I think it's, as we have heard now, like about the sector guide, the different pathways for paradigm shift, but also that new idea of the new asset class. And then we see the example of Climate Investor 2 that really bring in the private sector and mobilize the private sector for water and sanitation that really target to achieve really 11 million people to have supply of water, and 4 million of people that will really have a sanitation service, plus, of course, reducing carbon emission by 3.5 million ton. And then we heard from UNICEF about that WASH and integrated resilience or climate resilience, and also the framework, and how that you look at the people that really having access and living in vulnerable community or locations, and then the people that really having lacking totally access, so they don't really have access to water. So taking all that in mind, I would like to start by getting a comment really from our two distinguished ministers here about the opportunity of like how you see those ideas that can be really implemented, taking the context in Barbados and also in Palestine. I would like to get your comments about what could be really the barriers, where is the opportunity, and also how we can really, if it's successful, how we can replicate it also from different country in your region. So maybe I'll start with Dr. Chantel from Barbados.
Thank you very much. And let me start by thanking GCF for what is a critical discussion, certainly for Barbados, and I'm sure for other small island developing states. Before I talk about the challenges and the barriers, perhaps I'll start by the climate rationale that our partners normally ask for, and which we think is, our lived reality. So Barbados is a small island developing state. We have a population, we tell people, of around 300,000. In reality, it's perhaps about 289,000, 166 square miles. So that when we talk about small is us, yeah? We are also, however, in the world's top 15 water scarce countries. And therefore, as I said when I started, that discussions on issues of water security are always going to be extremely personal for us. Yeah. I also want to just very, very briefly also as well set the kind of profile for Barbados when we talk about the issues of water security. So we have limited access to fresh water, right? So there are few streams and rivers above ground, so that most of the fresh water is sourced from extraction of underground aquifers and pumping beneath the island. Our annual rainfall previously was estimated at 1,422 milliliters annually. Imagine that, right? So it's important to be able to understand our context, yeah? 1,422 millimeters annually. And that was concentrated in the context of what we call our wet season, which is between the months of June and December. And during the dry season, rainfall can be as minimal as 25 milliliters per month. Research has also shown that only 15 to 30% of rainfall reaches the aquifers. And additionally, we are also battling saline intrusion. Yeah, so it's very, very important that we also have that context. I also want to say that when we look at the climatic challenges and what that is also doing as well, what we note, and I talked about those figures in terms of our annual rainfall, what we've noted very, very recently is, again, is that the rainy season is starting later, is more compressed, and what this has meant is that we now have more unpredictable rainfalls, longer dry seasons, and more stress on vegetation, more intense rainfall events leading to less infiltration and more flooding. Yeah. So when we talk, about, like I said, what is that rationale? And I say again, this is our lived reality. Yeah? And so that we enter this conversation about, wastewater reuse, because it is an imperative for us in Barbados, and like I said, in other countries as well within the region. So that we are supportive of the GCF paradigm shifting pathways. And essentially, we have worked through a program, a PPF, called 3R Cruise. And 3R Cruise essentially stands for Reduce, Reuse, Recycle for Climate Resilience in Wastewater Management Systems in Barbados. But even before I talk again about that entry points, and we talk about barriers and challenges and also lessons learned, one of the ways that Barbados has sought to ensure that that resilience that we talk about is essentially going to be, I'm going to use the word sustainable, is that we have also as well housed our efforts in the context of an overarching framework, which is our Roof to Reefs program. And essentially our Roof to Reefs program is a holistic, multifaceted and multi-sectoral program, which is intended to address the key resilience and sustainable development challenges facing Barbados. And that is important, again, because it means that what we are attempting to do is to build policy coherence, so that we have taken a policy approach that includes treating wastewater as a resource. Remember the context that I gave, yeah? So setting that policy framework and that integrated framework is important for us, again, to ensure the resilience building that we need. And what we have also done is to make sure that we mainstream that policy through our physical development plan, our NDC, and all of the other main tenets. So again, that we do ensure that we are able to ground that policy. And in the context of water, this has resulted in coverage of the following: water and land use zoning, wastewater management, storm management, and flood alleviation. And so again, making the point that for us, one of the lessons learned is that overarching policy framework that drives the effort. Now, in the context of looking again specifically at the wastewater management and what we have done in the context of 3R Cruise there, and particularly looking again at those pathways that have been identified. So if we look at enhancing water conservation, water efficiency, and water reuse, again, what we've been able to do in this context, is we've looked at wastewater reuse through seeking to upgrade all of our treatment plants to tertiary level, essentially retrofitting for higher capacity over the long term and building resilience as well. So that even though we did have, some wastewater treatment plants, etc., those facilities were extremely old, breaking down consistently. So one of the ways to, again, ensure the mitigating efforts is to ensure that we were able to build those, and like I said, retrofit as well. Ensuring reuse of the water resource, particularly for agriculture, which is one of the highest users of water. And again, I think I want to stress on this a little bit, because I think it's one of the issues for small island developing states. It's that the challenges of climate are so intertwined. Yeah, we try to address one area. So in the context of achieving food security, we have a vision of expanding agricultural production, making sure that communities can get involved in kitchen gardens and all of those things, expanding the areas of involvement. But then that puts pressure on our water. So in the context of this project, what we have been able to do is to ensure that in the context of our water reuse, that we can channel that into the agricultural sector. And again, like I said, given government's efforts on food security and increasing output in the sector, this is extremely critical for us. It is also going to be used in the context of the agricultural sector for fertilizer, and then sold to the agricultural community. And activated sludge is also to be sold to members of the agricultural sector, the hotel sector, and as well our town and country planning department as well. And I want to say something just again in terms of the tourism sector. So we have use in the agricultural sector because, as I said, that focus on food security. But again, in the context of a small and developing states, we're heavily dependent on tourism. Yeah, heavily dependent on tourism. So that means a high level of tourism plants across the island that also as well pull heavily on our water resource. So being able to push reuse into the hotel sector is also, again, extremely important for us in the context of building resilience. We have also, in the context of this this project, ensured that, again, that treated sludge is to be used in landscaping and turf maintenance of lawns, golf courses, etc., all contributing again to the tourism sector. We've looked at improving potable water for storage, water harvesting, wastewater harvesting as well. And we're also in the process of evaluating opportunities for the generation of energy from wastewater as well. One of the other critical efforts is that we're moving the power usage to renewable base through the use of solar PVs as well. This is critical for us, again, and we talk about mitigation, because with a focus on abstraction from underground aquifers and pumping, water therefore is the highest user of electricity on the island. So that this move allows us to effectively contribute to both mitigation and adaptation to make our water sector more reliable in times of power outage. Then the water supply is insulated from such impacts and therefore more resilient. In the interest of time, I'll speed up. But again, there are also several interventions, again, in relation to strengthen integrated water resources management that we have also undertaken. So we're talking about revision of legislation, expanding the size and increasing the number of desalination plants, etc. So I'm hoping I'm painting a picture for you, again, based on this transformative pathway, looking at both mitigation and also adaptation measures. But also as well, and the last point I'll make before I hand over, is that, again, we have made sure to insulate the process for the insurance of that resilience building that is so necessary by ensuring that we have ongoing monitoring. So that, for instance, we have a ministerial subcommittee on water resources that meets every other week, and during times of crisis, every week. The committee is chaired by a minister and has other key ministers and technical heads to ensure that integrated approach that I talked about before. And more importantly, that subcommittee has to report to cabinet as well every 2 weeks. Yeah. So that we have built in an overarching policy framework and also an integrated framework in the context of ensuring our wastewater management systems.
Thanks, Dr. Chantel. Treating wastewater as a resources, I think that's really a key term. And thanks for bringing that Barbados project, because that type of project, it's really like a role model project that's really looking for adaptation mitigation benefits in the wastewater reuse sector. And I would encourage really other accredited entities to really look at this project and see as an example where it can be really replicated. With that, I would like to move to Dr. Nisreen, the Minister of Palestine, to give her reflection.
Thank you, Dr. Amjad, and thank you all for this opportunity. And I fully agree with you when you discuss that ensuring and achieving water security is an important SDG that directly connect to the survival and livelihood of communities. First of all, let me explain a little bit about the situation in Palestine and how these kind of projects can help us. Actually, in Palestine, we are suffering of two problems. Either there is no water resources, and or scarcity of water resources, and this is because the Israeli occupation is control more than 80% of land and water resources. And if there's any of water resources, we can say it's polluted, so it's need to be treated. And this is polluted actually due to several reasons. It can be due to the dumping of wastewater, because in many areas, there's no sewer system, infrastructure in the villages, or in camps, for example. And sometimes there is often the wastewater from the Israeli settlements, it's discharged in our wadis. So therefore, there is a pollution of water resources. In Gaza, actually, the situation is more worse, because more than 97% of the water there is not the quality is very bad and not meet even the WHO standards for human uses. And this is also this is because of many reasons. One of them, the sea water intrusion, and due to the overpumping of the wells, and also due to the a little amount of water consumption, which is there's already no water resources in Gaza. So this is extremely water pollution there. But however, there's a project actually was implemented and co-funded by GCF for a treatment plant there in Gaza in cooperation with AFD. If we are talking about the solutions also for Palestine and looking for the water security, there's two options: either water harvesting. Water harvesting, it can be applicable in Palestine, because we are talking about the annual rainfall. It's range between 300 millimeter to 800 millimeter per year in some areas. So there is an opportunity for water harvesting technology. And also, if we are looking for the second alternative, it's the treated wastewater. And this is really a very a promising solution, but the problem that we should look for the whole story of the treated wastewater, from wastewater generation until treatment, and then until reuse. Because as I mentioned before, that there are some villages, there's no sewer system. So how we can implement treated wastewater if we don't have this sewer system? Second, also, if we want to implement this wastewater treatment plant, we have a problem also where to implement this. As I mentioned yesterday, that more than 60% of our land is located in area C. So this is mean that we cannot have a permission to implement our treatment plant. And after this, what kind of technology we want? We want, of course, a high technology, because we want a very good or high quality of effluent if we wanted to reuse it. And the effluent, it has to be in a high quality, because already the water consumption in Palestine is very low. So this is mean that will concentrate the influent organic load in the influent. So therefore, we need a high technology, and then we should look for the options of reuse. And here it can be the challenges actually for reuse, because if is the farmers will accept this or not, we should work in the public awareness also for the farmers, and also for the standards implemented in Palestine for agriculture, for reuse of treated wastewater in agriculture. So we only can use it for the fruit trees and for forage. So also, therefore, we should look for this period. Also, we should look for the various water tariff and suitability of treated wastewater, as I mentioned, to current cropping system. But of course, it would be a very big opportunities for farmers, because at the end, we will give them a source of water, which is it's a renewable source of water. It would be a renewable, and also the cost, it would be much less than the fresh water. So therefore, we should focus on the affordability of water cost and the adequate gap between fresh and treated wastewater, and the private sector should be national also in this. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's really a great point. So it's really highlighting really the local context that's really matter, because again, the solutions need to be designed in acceptable manner for the local context. So as you can hear, like in Palestine, so you really need to look at the high technology, the cost, the acceptance, the standard. So that again, that providing really barriers for implementation. So taking that, and before I go to audience, because I know there is a comment from the audience as well, I would like to go to Dr. Andrea and say, like, so taking those barriers that coming again from the local context and community, how do you see the private sector role here? What could be really the private sector role, and how we can mobilize the private sector more?
Thank you, Amgad. Indeed, maybe before a few words about overall concept of water as a new asset class. Indeed, it might be great news for private sector, especially if this investment added to a hypothetical portfolio of other investments can shift outwards efficient frontier of risk-reward breakdown optimum, and therefore providing better returns for the investment. This is one of the arguments that everybody in the private sector should hear. But at the same time, here at this global programming conference, we should be well aware of the limitations of private sector approach and fine line between responsible business practices and detrimental use of finite natural resources like clean water. In that context, GCF, on one hand, of course, bringing into the projects related to water and other mitigation and adaptation projects, new dimensions addressing sustainability and paradigm shifting nature of climate-related projects supported by the Green Climate Fund. This is one of the roles we are actively playing, and this is very challenging tasks for private sector actors who sometimes are constrained by the short term of their reporting periods, by the profitability of their operations rather than sustainability and long-term view of their activities. However, bringing that dimensions into the projects, we're also bringing additional resources. First of all, concessional funding that is provided to our partners through traditional mechanisms, including grants, equity, loans, innovative financial structures like it was outlined in the presentation of Ayaka, but also other structures related, for instance, to debt for climate swap, where through a trilateral agreement between creditor country, debtor country, developing country recipient, and Green Climate Fund, we potentially can mobilize and provide much needed debt relief for highly indebted sovereign countries and mobilizing enhanced financing for climate. Also, there were some words about technology, and in my team, we are actively working to bring new technological solutions in order to address water scarcity and other challenges to the water-related problems. So these are the particular and concrete answers to these questions, how we can incentivize private sector answers to the water problems, and overall knowledge, financial resources, and practical experience behind Green Climate Fund can make water as a new asset class not only exciting opportunity, but also a great solution to the mitigation and adaptation climate change problems we are all facing today. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. I know there is a comment from the Deputy Minister of Armenia. I'm not sure if she's in the room, Dr. Gayan. She in the room? Oh, okay. So until she come back, I would like to go back to the panel and Sylvia. So you have presented the framework, and taking what we have listened here, where is the gap? How we can really take that to implementation? Taking like the context we have here from Barbados and also from Palestine.
Do you mean the gap in the social sectors?
Yes.
Okay, so what we have seen across the years working in the social sectors, and particularly the water and sanitation one, we have seen two main bottlenecks. One is that in general, the water and sanitation policies and strategies are not aligned with the climate strategies and policies. And definitely, for instance, last year, because it was this COP where the governments should update the NDCs, we put a lot of emphasis in our country teams to really advise the government to include WASH as a priority sector in the NDCs, because normally the different policies don't talk to each other. And this is an important gap, because it's really a main barrier, because no project would be approved, I understand, if this is not recognized as a government priority. But we work in a stream fragmentation context in the countries, right? And I mean in the sector as well. So this is one. The sector one, the second one is really a lack of capacity in the sector to really go through all these steps in a systematic way. As I presented, understanding the risks and appraise the options and then look at the modalities to implement is not a big deal, but you need to invest work and time to do that. You need to understand what are your risks. You need to understand if you, for instance, in the case of Barbados or the other examples this morning, do you need to look water somewhere else? Do you need to do groundwater mapping using GIS technology to understand if there is groundwater in a different places where the normal ones? So all this will take place before you reach into the step where you can ask for finances. And this is a critical point, because normally countries don't have enough resources, particularly in the social sectors, to dedicate to this preparatory process. And this is definitely a second gap that we see, and we are trying to bridge with the support of partners, of donors, and also looking at the options that an entity like the Green Climate Fund offers for getting all these countries ready and prepared. Thank you.
Before finance, planning, tools, policy, innovation, technologies. Yeah. So with that, I wanted to go to Ayaka. So with the Climate Investor 2, what could be really the lesson learned in developing those projects, such type of project for the private sector? What lesson learned we can carry forward for following projects?
Thank you, Amgad. That's an excellent question. I think the main learning from Climate Investor 2 and the fund structure is that there is a way for to de-risk the private sector participants who are risk averse, who are interested in this kind of projects, but who would need a certain arrangement in order to come invest their capital into this kind of water and adaptation project. Here in Climate Investor 2, we were able to achieve that because we had a tier-based approach where we, GCF, came in as the lowest tier of the fund, as well as the riskiest part of the fund, the project, so that the commercial capital essentially could see how the early stage idea performed before their investment went into the ideas. So I think this kind of approach is something quite universal, like it's not really limited to water, but it's something that can be taken in other sectors in adaptation and water projects also. Thank you.
Thanks, Ayaka. And for the last comment from Dr. Gayan, the Deputy Minister of Armenia.
Thank you very much. First of all, sorry that I haven't represented before and I can't be as well as you, but I can clearly see the gender equality and how much women involved in water sector. This makes sense for me. Thank you very much. I really appreciate for your presentation because they are truly very informative and interesting, and we can get many important things from it. Because when we're talking about Armenia and our region, we're talking about transborder questions with water security sector. We are talking about that we have many water resources that now coming to our region, but we can't make the better management of them. So water resource management, for us, this is priority with transborder relations. And we have a good experience with our neighbors, Iran. And we have already talked about the Arax River, and now we are working with Georgian friends to understand how we can go to cooperation with Debet River. And I think we need to start because this is about investment. This is about already country investment, and the private sector is watching to government and want to understand, do government manage the idea generation, and do government understand how they want to increase this investment? So private sector is waiting for PPPs, is waiting for pipelines, is waiting for project concept note to understand how can they invest to that priority sector. And this is linked to GCF investment policies for private sector too. When we talk about how we can increase private sector to go to come and to work with GCF foundations to make this accreditation, etc., we just now need to understand that government make the strategy and they have clearly view about the sectoral things. And water in our region is priority because you know that we have many circumstances with our neighbors. So we do need to understand where is the dam creation, this is water security, how we use the secondary use of water, because we have big issues with fisheries and it increased the economic level of the output. So country don't want to stop this sectoral increasing. We need to understand how we can manage the agriculture and the this irrigation system. And Armenia has shown the interest in water sector because we have several engagement in international many agencies as World Bank, ADB, KfW, UNDP, EU. We have now in the creation of big database system, because when we talk about investment, we talk about data. So without data, we can't manage the project, because all project concept note creation, I think my colleagues understand me, quite often haven't numbers, haven't any calculations. And as you, as a policy maker, you don't believe in that project because you can't understand where is the calculation, where is the economic impact, where is the outputs, what do I have to understand, where is the monitoring? Because after all the project creation and investment, it must be monitoring system to understand, do I get my target or no? So I really appreciate that we have now opportunity to talk about GCF strategy, because we go to GCF2 and we are talking about this REST strategy, and we are talking about water investment. This is very important because in the portfolio of GCF, as we see the Asian region where we are represented, this is only 14% portfolio about water investment sector. So I think we need to increase this number, because we are ready for adaptation projects. We are ready to start this adaptation implementation in national adaptation projects. And this is very important to get the peace, because water is now the reason of war. So when we talk about private sector, when we talk about investment, when we talk about green agenda, climate measures, and all about this, we need to understand, we need peace to have economic benefits. We need peace to understand how we can reach the climate agenda. Without peace, we will not reach anything. And water is the main issue of today's war. So we are talking about transborder cooperation, the GCF fund. This is one more supporting agency of creating this peace under these countries in all regions, because I believe that people who represent all countries, they have the same issues. The water now is the basic thing that we need to solve to reach the peace in countries, to reach transborder cooperation, to understand how we share the water. Because even in Armenia, 546 little villages haven't access to water. And this is why the government will never choose, because people want to live in villages when they have water for irrigation, for drinking water, etc. And they want to live in peace. So this is our thing that we want to say. And thank you very much for opportunity. Thank you that you remember about Armenia. We wish peace, and thank you very much for GCF to giving us this opportunity to talk with these great people and to share our experience and to get many knowledge of this great inspire more climate action. This, I like your hashtag conference. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dr. Gayan from Armenia. It's a very ambitious message and a very strong message. And of course, transboundary water is one of our, again, key areas under Pathway to the Integrated Water Resource Management. And would like to see as well projects in the transboundary water. And it's great you highlight also the private sector and how the private sector really can invest and waiting for the pipelines, waiting to see project and the transformation ideas or the new initiatives that we are discussed today. It's a one way to start bringing in the private sector and show them really how they can invest in the water sector, because again, water, it's a public goods at the end. It's a public entity, and it's a public product. So again, to invest in a public product, you really need to consider those ESG, and also you need to consider the Paris Agreement and the SDGs. So before we conclude, I would like just for 1 minute to get a final word from the Minister of Palestine and Barbados as well about how do you see the role of the private sector in your country? Like you have highlighted, for example, in Palestine, the number of barriers. What could be the role of the private sector? Where do you see them they can play a role in the water security?
Actually, this is a little bit a huge question. I cannot answer it very quickly, because I told you that most of, if we are talking especially for water and water security, because of water, our water resources, it's if it's available, it's owned by some people, and if not, it's controlled by Israel occupation. So of course, private sector can, if we are talking about the treatment or treatment plan, maybe they can work in the monitoring and in the operation of this treatment plan. They will have a good opportunity there, and also they can have an opportunity if we are talking about water user associators. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Dr. Chantal.
Thank you. Like my colleague from Palestine, it's a big question. I started by, kind of painting the picture of Barbados as a small island developing state. So one of the big issues that we have in relation to the involvement of the private sector is always going to be scale. Yeah. In the projects, in a population of 300,000, it is very, very difficult to encourage the private sector to participate, because they often are not able to see what they believe are the necessary, either the profit margins, or the clear interests in getting involved. We want to encourage the private sector, in these projects, and happy to, in the context of GCF's framework, to be able to work through GCF in order to be able to leverage resources and build skilled and de-risk. But very, very often for small countries, it is the fact that we just don't have the scale that attracts the private sector. And that's one of the big issues. And finally, as well, I do want to also just comment us a little bit on, the notion of making sure that we have responsible investment, and how do we kind of balance that as well, which is also going to be extremely critical. Water as a right with a population that has grown up with continual access provided by government. The transition of your communities and societies now to a asset-based approach is one that will depend quite heavily on lots of education and lots in terms of getting buy-in as well.
Thanks so much. And I don't want it to be standing between you and the break. So I think it was really a great session where we have discussed the water security guide that really gives that strategy. And if I summarize really the whole session in 5 words, so I think it's really the role of GCF here is to really to continue to support the country in terms of policy, institutional framework, to look at the opportunity of using the credit enhancement to really de-risk investment and finance that transition into the water sector. Third, enhance to really again enhance the financial model that really encourage that public-private partnership, and also a special vehicle model. And then last word, it's really the innovation technologies. So how we can bring those innovative technology and solutions for scaling up for more adaptation and mitigation. So with that, I would like all audience to share me clapping hand to thanks all our panel and presenter and speaker today. Thank you, everyone.